Welcome to the Benalytical Podcast. In this episode, we'll be discussing constitutional rights and liberties, along with the social contract theory and welfare states. I thought we would start off this episode by kind of defining our views on why we believe in small government and why we think it's effective for rule and leadership specifically. So I'll start off. Basically, I'm a libertarian, as many of you know, because I believe that centralized government is basically the beginning of tyranny. I think that if you have an organization without proper oversight, there is bound to be flaws. And I think that goes without saying. But I guess that's kind of the utopian view, but the view that if we set up a government well, like if we set up a good moral system, like say democracy, I would say is the most moral system that we have. Direct democracy is every vote counts for one, and it's basically mob rule. I think that there are dangers of that, but I think that's the most moral. So a lot of people think that because we have the most moral system, or closest to, because we don't have direct democracy, obviously, we have electoral college. We have kind of indirect democracy.
We're a republic.
Yeah, right. We're not a direct democracy of mob rule, basically. But
yeah, France gave us plenty of examples of why direct democracy doesn't work.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's why they had the Reign of Terror. Half of them were super pissed off about it and decided, oh, well, let's just cut the other half's head off.
Yeah. A lot of people think that because we have a moral system that everyone will act morally. And that's just, I think that's naive and I think that's dangerous. So I think that there is an important place both for citizens and Overwatch committees that are both federal and local to have a place in overseeing government. So I think that right now, the system that we have, the federal government system that we have, is way too large, and I think it's way too powerful. I am of the absolute belief that we should scale back almost every form of power that the federal centralized government has and give it to local and state governments. I think that, for example, we talked a couple days ago about about welfare. So I think that welfare should be controlled by local governments instead of centralized committees who aren't in the area, who don't know what's going on in the community, who aren't there. Basically, they don't have the same exposure to the situation. Whereas I think that a lot more local and charitable institutions that are in the community, churches, anything of that nature, those communities are there and they're experiencing the hardship themselves, and they can much better come alongside those who are suffering. So that's just a small example, but I think that the system that we have now is very corrupt. I think it's made to be corruptible. I think it's very dangerous, the system that we have. And I'm in full support of small government system. I think that there should be a competitive nature between states. So states should be fighting for citizens. States should be scaling back laws that infringe on privacy rights because that brings more citizens to their state. States should be competing against each other for trade. Citizens should be competing for land, territory, whatever it is. I think that there is a lot of benefits to that. The only thing that I would say the federal government has a role in is basically conscription, which I believe is a federal right, which is kind of odd for libertarians, but we'll get into that later. And then also taxation and trade. So trade between states so that there aren't civil wars that break out, and then also trade between nations. I think the federal government has a lot to do with that. But other than that, I think that the federal government should have a very limited role in how we as Americans kind of actively use our rights and liberties.
Yeah, I agree. I think, well, the problem is people neglect to account for the fact that people are naturally greedy. People are naturally power hungry. So whatever system you put into place, you have to account for the fact that there will always be individuals who will do anything for that power. Yeah. And so when we have a slot open for that power, in our situation, it would be the federal government. You're always going to have people to claw after that power. And with the opportunities, take natural disasters, emergency situations, there's always going to be opportunities for that power to grow. So not only is there a position where you can gain a significant portion of power, but you can also expand that. And I think by far the best example is from Star Wars, Chancellor Palpatine's rise to power. I'm saying it, democracy dies with thunderous applause. When there's an emergency and you need one person to lead, you give that person more power. And that's good insofar as they give the power back. But that never ends up happening.
Except for George Washington.
Yeah, except for George Washington.
That's why he's my favorite president.
And Plato actually talks quite extensively on who's the right person to have power.
Right.
And we can go into his more in-depth philosophy another time. But basically, he sets up the noble lie. If you've ever heard the term the noble lie,
Right. Yep.
this is basically the precursor to feudalism.
Yep.
And it's good and it's bad in a way. It's good because it has a set boundary for people to exist in. I think more or less that's a good thing. People need direction in life. People need an area where they can thrive, and not everyone thrives in every area. Another thing he points out is, the people who are best suited to lead and have power are the people who don't want it.
Yeah.
Um, and in the way we run things now, I mean, you could find people who don't want to be the president of the United States. That's not a hard thing to do. Those people in particular are the ones who are best suited to lead. But it's a volunteer system. If you want to run for president, you can. No one's forcing you to do that. Now, obviously, I'm speaking in ideal terms. You can't just find someone off the street and say, hey, you're going to be the president whether you'd like it or not. But it is a good reminder that, people are susceptible to corruption. And when you have a system that enables that and gives room for growth, I think it should warrant some caution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Plato, I mean, the way you kind of dove into that, I think that's really what we want to get into today is kind of talking about, because you talked about kind of it moving from what he saw as more idealistic categories to actual physical categories of serfdom in the feudalistic and caste systems as well. Is he had three classes for an ideal society in his perfect city. There was the producers and workers, basically those who made the goods and services in the society. Then he had the guardians, who basically kept order and were the enforcers, and then protected from invaders as well. And then he had the philosophers, the philosopher kings, as he calls them, who he thinks are the most rational and self-controlled people, which he thinks is really important for leaders. And yeah, you mentioned as well that he thinks that if you have ambition, basically if you want to be king, that makes you the least ready. It's kind of that old adage that, like, I think it was in Narnia when I was first exposed to it, but it says when Peter's talking to Aslan, he's like, I'm not ready. And Aslan's like, that's exactly why you are. He's like, you're not. You have something to learn. You have something to gain from this opportunity. And that's why you're worthy. So I think that's an important thing that's kind of been forgotten, especially in our age, where it's just basically the more popular you are, the more assumed, your power kind of is, your sovereignty is kind of given as a result of popularity instead of experience or actual qualifications. But
And the thing is it's not even like it's a forgotten idea. It's a remarkably like intuitive idea. Like, it doesn't take reading a book to come to this conclusion. It's pretty, self-explanatory. I don't know if you've watched the show or if any of the listeners have watched the show, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Have you ever seen it?
yeah,
So Jake Peralta is who's played by Andy Samberg and played in his usual role as a goofball. He gets wrongly convicted, goes to jail for 3 months, and he comes back and he's forced to be on desk duty. He hates desk duty because he wants to be back in the action, and he has to prove that he's ready. Basically, through the course of the episode, he realizes he isn't, because he understands the gravity of what it means to go to prison and live that kind of in those conditions. And he says to the captain, he says, I'm not ready. I need another week to kind of like gather myself. And the captain explains the exact same sentiment. He says, the fact that you think you're not ready shows to me that you understand the gravity, and you now have an insight that most police don't have. So if Andy Samberg can bring about this grandiose idea, I think it's safe to say that just about anyone can put this together. The problem is that's not how our elections are structured to work.
mm-hmm.
It's not a community pushing towards one person. It's okay, we need the community to like this person first, or we need to choose the person and then make the community like them. And so you play the roles backwards, where they're going to say, whether it's the DNC or the Republicans, they're going to say, okay, so we need to find someone that we like, and then we're going to make everyone on our side like them as well. And it's
Mhm. Sure.
incredibly disingenuous, because at that point you don't know what's that actual person and what's the facade that they have to put up for people to like them. And I think this
Yeah.
is why so many people like Trump, specifically because the GOP didn't like him. They didn't choose this guy. Like, let's make no mistake, the Republicans wanted nothing to do with Donald Trump.
Hmm.
But you knew at the very least, whether you hated his rhetoric, his policies, you hated the guy altogether, you at least knew, like, this is what you're getting. Hillary Clinton, God knows what she's gonna do, because you're fed one thing from the party, and then you get something completely different. And I think that's what was refreshing about Trump was, at least we know we get what we paid for. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, yeah, in terms of politics in general is definitely a manipulation of the identity. I think that's fairly. I think man as a political animal is a natural manipulator of his own identity, and I think
Yeah.
that's something that's become more and more apparent as people have kind of seen this break between what the media portrays and what the person actually is. And I think that's a helpful distinction that will continue to be made more distinct. So yeah, we can kind of just jump in right away with some topics that I think are really important. I think first off, if we're going to talk about small government, I think two of the most important topics are probably taxation and conscription. I think you could probably agree with that as well, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So basically, for me, conscription is defined as compulsory enrollment for service in a country's armed forces. This is something that's basically been a tradition that's set in stone since, I would say, early Egyptian pharaohs would started instilling a system like this, basically for national security of the borders, especially along the southern regions of Egypt. They would instill basically values of patriotism and nationalism, and basically get soldiers to fight on a conscriptory basis as a result of their Egyptian nationality. So this is a tradition that's been around for a long time, but I think that the biggest thing to recognize right off the bat is that government's true purpose is to self-perpetuate more government. That's my view. I think that government is, and I think that's a good thing as well, for in some cases, but left unchecked, government's sole purpose is to perpetuate more government. So if that's left unchecked, I think it can get out of hand really quickly. So my view on conscription is basically conscription should only be allowed on defensive wars. Conscription should not be a system that's used in offensive wars. So what that means is basically if we are attacked on our homeland, on the soil of the United States, or a territory that we have direct sovereignty over, then that would be a defensive war. So we would have the obligation to be conscripted by our government to defend both the government, our territory, and our basic national pride, basically. And I think the government has the right to call for conscription in a defensive war. However, if there is an offensive war, like say the government wants oil in the Middle East, and they're just going to go and declare war on Iraq or Iran, like what happened in the early 2000s, I think that we have the right to refuse conscription. So conscription would not be allowed, in my view. Conscription would not be a system that would be used in an offensive war.
Yeah, but so I agree with you in principle. I think something does need to be brought up. One, what constitutes an act of war on American soil? So um, would 9/11 be considered an act of war on American soil? I mean, after all, that is one of the
Oh,
big reasons why we went back in. And another thing is if that's the starting line for conscription, what happens in hypothetically, what happens when the Russians invade, Alaska, or the Russians invade California?
mhm.
Once they make their first assault, I mean, this is more of a tactical argument. It's going to take at least 12 weeks before we can have those soldiers ready.
Well,
And
we have a
throughout,
standing army as well, correct? So we have a good force. I think it's over 1 million right now of standing in just the army branch alone. So
yeah,
I don't think we're really at a shortage in terms of military members. Um, kind of going to your what qualifies as an active war. So this is what I think an active war is. It's a direct military response from a government on one of the territories of the United States. So say it's a terrorist attack and it's not explicitly backed by the state of Iran or Iraq, which was the case in 2000. That would be that would not constitute as an active war. However, as it is a terrorist attack, I would say, and we saw this because they didn't call for conscription, correct? But we saw that there was people who felt uniquely strong about this conflict, and they joined, and I can encourage that 100%. So they enlisted, they joined the fight because they felt particularly strong about that unique instance. However, it was not an act of war by any stationed government, right? Even if it wasn't explicit. We didn't have evidence to say that it was explicit. So it does not call for conscription, in my view.
yeah, yeah, and I agree. And we also have to take into account, I mean, the American spirit. World War II, we were hesitant, and we had the draft. Um, Vietnam was a particularly, political war. It was divided. It's situations like those where, yeah, those are instances where we didn't necessarily need to be there, which, it's curious. What about America's interests? And like you said, we have a pretty strong standing army, and by pretty strong, I mean we're stronger than damn near every other country combined. Um, you know, yeah. The concept of conscription is at this point in time more of a theoretical idea, and more of an ideological position than it is like a literal. This is an issue that we need to be discussing and have a solution for by the end of the weekend, because shit's
Absolutely.
about to go down. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely agree. And what you kind of said, talking about the American spirit, is really what was portrayed by the Libertarian Party. They issued a statement. This was back in 2014. They put out a statement condemning conscription outright. So they said the draft is simply slavery by another name. Drafting people to go abroad and kill or be killed is barbaric and a discredit to our military and country. If a national emergency is so severe as to merit mobilizing extra troops, Americans from all backgrounds, ages, and genders will pitch in to do what is needed. The Libertarian Party urges elected leaders to end the draft and also pursue foreign policy which is less dependent on military might, end quote. So that's something that I 100% agree with. The only issue is that, you know this about me as well, but I am a social contract theorist, and I subscribe to that ideology 100%. So basically, what that means is that citizens create and give power to government, and in return, the government rewards the citizens with rights. Those rights are such things as property rights and, I mean, criminal rights as well. So, say you're arrested, you have the right to call for an attorney, you have the right to remain silent. You have a list of rights, basically, right?
Let's not use the term reward in exchange.
I for me this is a reward because an exchange specifically because citizens have rights and governments have rights. But the main difference is that citizens have liberties. So liberties are what keeps the government under the control of the people, right? So citizens and government both have duties to each other. So citizens have the duty of taxation and conscription, in my view, and government has the duty of protection and territory. So for me, the complete demolition of conscription is a problem because that takes away one of the duties of citizenship. But I do think that the citizenship should be able to demand a qualification as to why there is a conscription process, and specifically be able to deny it if it is an unworthy one.
Yeah, I agree. But you also have to keep in mind, like, at the end of the day, we are 100% completely and totally free. If enough people believe in something, it doesn't matter what the government, if one day China comes and knocks on the door and they say they want their money back, and the American people, for whatever reason are A-okay with that, the American people are free to sit on their couch and let them and take everything. Like, ultimately, the government's power can only go so far, where if people want something, they're going to get it, and
Absolutely.
government can't stop them. So,
Absolutely. But I think that
so
it's
yeah,
important that people recognize that the government, that they have rights to the government, because that's the only thing that keeps that balance, right? So if everyone knew that the government only functions within the purview of citizens, which is currently the case in the state of a democracy, then we would have total chaos. The government would have no sovereignty. The government would have no legitimacy. And I think that's a danger, because I think we need government, even though it's limited. I think we need limited centralized government and strong local government. So kind of what you were talking about with like the Chinese or whatever it was, the Russians attacking Alaska. I mean, that's a great analysis, but we can just look at Red Dawn. Have you seen that movie?
of course I've seen that movie.
It's a
I'm
great
an
movie.
American.
It's a great movie. But yeah, I mean that's basically a pretty accurate, I would say, of what would happen. I mean, we would have standing militias of just citizens of just towns that would be standing up and fighting, even if the government is not.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I always make the joke, if the Russians or the Chinese, they really want to take American soil, that's great. Just wait till they come to Texas and meet, you know, 6'4" Brad, who's been lifting since he was 8 and it only shoots guns in his free time.
yeah, I mean
I
the whole southern belt, that whole that
You're
whole
not you're not getting past that. I'm sorry. Like, guns outnumber people 3-1 in Texas. I don't care what the Chinese have. They're not gonna win.
there's a delicate balance that exists between citizens and government. So I do think it's a reward system, um, because of duty. So say for example, you have done your duty to government. So say you've paid your taxes and you've been conscripted, or you're a member of the military. So if that were the case, right? If you have been given citizenship, which I won't say is a reward, but if you have been given citizenship, then you are rewarded with rights, right? Because if you're not a citizen of the United States, you don't have those rights, correct?
Yeah.
So I would say in that, I guess it's fairly relative, but in that you are a citizen of the United States, you have been rewarded with rights. So you have rights that protect you within the territory of the United States, and oftentimes without as well. I mean, as we've seen, if you're an American citizen, you have a lot of power out of the United States in terms of conflict and even prisoner exchanges as well. The United States does not obviously negotiate with terrorists, but we have a very strong foreign policy as well, which I think heavily benefits American citizens
I mean,
who are
just
outside the United States.
read the words on your passport. I mean, if you flip through the pages and you go to, I don't know if it's at the front or the back, but it says, like, you are not to be unlawfully held in a foreign country. You are to be given, access to the United States. It literally lays out, like, the things as an American citizen that you have a right to.
Mm-hmm.
When Pastor Brunson was taken and arrested in Turkey, I mean, the U.S. government, for what it seems, and he's back, did what they could to get him back. You know what I mean? And they went in there and they determined if it was lawful, and
Yeah,
if
albeit it was a very delayed process.
delayed process, certainly. And I'm not going to get into the foreign policy of what the Turks say. Take North Korea, the college student who got detained in North Korea. That was a little hairier, but, like, that's a serious thing. You can't keep an American citizen.
Yeah, and I think
But
I think dealing with President Erdogan as well is a touchy touchy
oh
subject
yeah,
for most foreign policy members right now. I mean, he's quite a volatile character, as we've
oh
seen.
yeah.
He's been grabbing a lot of power in that region for a long time. So
But at the end of the day, they're a sovereign nation. We can't decide what he does or what he doesn't do. That's their problem.
mm,
But another thing that's brought up, that's almost an inverse, is, are illegal immigrants coming into the U.S. We see that they're not citizens. They're not going to be conscripted into the military. They're not going to pay a federal tax. There are a lot of things they get they get American health care. People talk about health care. Oh, the health care is so broken. Oh, people can't pay for it. If you go into the hospital and it's an emergency, you fell and stabbed yourself with a piece of rebar. The hospital has to take care of you
Hmm.
legally. Like
Sure.
legally, they have to give you aid, and they're gonna sew you up. They're gonna fix you. They're gonna take you to the hospital. All that good stuff, and then they're gonna send you the bill. You don't have to pay that bill. Like people don't realize, or people who complain about it don't realize you don't have to pay the bill. It can't affect your credit score. It cannot. Like it can't hurt your credit score if you don't pay that bill. And they can't hold it over your head. They can't send it to employers. They can't
I
like
think
the
I think most people have the issue with it's the insurance companies. That's largely, at least in my experience, that's largely where a lot of the complaints are coming from, because
yeah,
it's lower income families who have exorbitant insurance policy bills that do affect their credit, that do have to be paid. So it's not so much the medical expenses themselves; it's those who are enforcing them. It's the middleman, so to speak.
yeah. But that's the thing. If you can't afford insurance and you get in a car accident, you're gonna get, I mean, top tier. It's not even up for debate. The U.S. has the best medical services in the world. I mean, people from Canada, they drive over to America to use our doctors, use our hospitals because it's the best. I mean, it's universally known. This isn't even a controversial fact
I
because
don't know if
when
that is a fact, though. Is that a fact?
it is a fact. Like
Okay.
it's objectively true. Like we have the best healthcare system.
because because my impression was that Sweden, Switzerland, Korea, and Japan were higher ranked on that list than we are.
In terms of people who get covered. But there's two things you have to keep in mind. One, our surgeons and our equipment on that alone is better because we have competition. Because doctors have an incentive to become the best they can be and give everyone the best care they can get because they can charge whatever they want. When you look at Sweden, you look at all the Nordic countries, they're 98% white and don't even come to the population within a sixth of the US.
Sure.
It's not hard for them to take care of everyone. And
Absolutely.
even with those, they've already drawn back universal health care. They don't have it anymore. They had it for like 5 years and they were like, oh shit, we can't pay for this.
Yeah.
And they've
But
drawn it back. So the big argument for universal health care being the Nordic countries, even with the exorbitant advantage that they had, it doesn't work for them either.
yeah,
You see Canadians where the government now has power to determine your kidney's failing. It's going to be a $400,000 surgery and you have a 50% chance of living. The Canadians aren't paying for that. The government's not going to let you get that surgery. You had the kid in the UK, Alfie, what's his face? I'm spacing his name. He had a serious condition after birth. He wasn't supposed to live for a couple of hours, and the British government said, "We're pulling the plug. We're not paying for this anymore." And there was massive outcry. The U.S. said, "We will sponsor them, send him to the U.S. We'll take care of him." Italy said, "Send him to us. We'll take care of him. We'll pay for all his stuff." And making a statement because the British are the way the British are, they say, "No, he can't leave." And they tried to kill him, and he held on for like 8 more weeks. He was supposed to die within 24 hours, but he held on for 8 weeks. And why? Because the government has control. The government gets to say who gets services and who doesn't.
sure. I think you made an interesting point there with the Nordic countries. This is something that I've talked a lot about on just in person as well. But diversity has a lot to do with the outcomes of political practice. So, say for example, um, like a lot of people, I personally I see a lot of benefits in communism. Right? There's a lot of benefits to socialism and communism.
Yeah.
The problem is they cannot be effectively enforced because you kind of mentioned this early on in the podcast. Everyone is greedy. Everyone seeks power. So you can't decide to enforce a utopian like system in a dystopian world, because you're just asking for corruption, and that's what happens every time. So when you see the semi-socialist countries in the Nordic regions and in Switzerland as well, you're seeing, and a lot of people are pointing to that. A lot of people on the left, a lot of people on the right are pointing to those systems as well. That a lot of those people are pointing to those regions and saying these are beacons of socialism done right. And I would say, first of all, they're not fully socialist, right? You kind of mentioned this as well, but they don't have fully universal healthcare. Second of all, their income is incredibly high. Their average income is almost twice as much as the United States for both men and women. Men
Well, yeah, there's like
men and
eight
women,
people.
their STEM fields. This is something that's interesting as well. Their STEM fields are so over time. STEM fields in the Nordic regions have become almost equally employed. Right, both men and women are in STEM fields at a very high rate in the Nordic countries. The problem is as that as diversity in the STEM fields has increased, basically you kind of mentioned this, but people are less and less likely to choose those jobs. Even though there's more and more diversity, people are less and less choosing STEM field research and practices because there's not as much incentive. Everyone makes around the same amount of money anyway, right? There's a lot of inflation, you could say, job inflation in that job market because of how many people have gone into STEM fields. So that's drastically reduced in the past 5 years. As well, you mentioned this as well. Those countries are almost all white. There is no diversity in terms of religion, in terms of socioeconomic status, and in terms of ethnicity at all. There's almost no diversity in Nordic countries. And so that allows this subconscious of tribalism that we see oftentimes a lot in the United States.
Yeah, and I'll give you the three reasons why socialism would never work in America. And here's why. When we try to model the Nordic countries, the first, like you said, is diversity. You don't have those racial ties. Size and diversity play a huge factor. The population is so small. There isn't a large enough area for there to be enough problems. So everything looks hunky dory. The second is they're tied to the EU. If you took the Nordic countries out of the EU, they would fall at the wayside because their currency is propped up by the rest of the countries. They don't have manufacturing. They don't have any natural resources. They have a lot of smart people who design and develop things. And that's good. That, like, as an isolated thing, that's great. But they're propped up by all the other countries, and we can see they have a lot of problems. Going back to the diversity thing, Sweden and the Nordic countries were like, yeah, if you are an immigrant, if you are a refugee, come to our country. And at first, I'm guessing all the refugees were thinking, who the hell wants to go to Sweden? Who wants to go to, like, why? Because it's cold and gross and no one wants to live there. So that was the first thing. But then once it got bad enough and everyone started moving up there, the Swedes are like, what the hell's happening? Why are these people here? They don't look like me. And then they shut it down. Like, once people started coming and they got a little taste of what diversity looks like, they shut it down so fast, so incredibly fast. So that just shows how devastating. I mean, it's a fragile little orb, and the second anything happens to it, it shatters. If the EU has any issues, the Nordic countries are going to fall apart. If there's any diversity, the Nordic countries are going to be the first to fall apart. But what I think is the biggest flaw with socialism in the Nordic countries, and the reason why it will never work, socialism, the reason why communism failed, and why it's never going to work in the US. And I'll even say this: if you can get past this problem, I will concede. I will donate $100 to Bernie Sanders right now.
Well, it won't do him much good.
Well, it won't do him much good, but trust me, that guy's literally hasn't died yet. We're going to see him again. If you can explain how to get over the force aspect of socialism and communism, then I will concede every argument. Because at the end of the day, you have to admit that there are lazy people in the world. There are people who don't want to work. It doesn't
The
matter.
freeloaders. The freeloaders.
They're freeloaders. They exist. It is a fact. And when they are the freeloaders of a society, we have to pay for them, which requires a government, a single entity, a group of people to take what you've earned and give it to someone else, whether by coercion or force. Something you earned is taken from you and given to someone else. That is morally wrong. I mean, it's the argument, what is it? What is it when one person goes up to you, beats you up, and takes your money? It's theft. What if you vote for a bunch of people, they go, beat you up, and take your money? Well, it's taxation. It's the same thing. Unless you can get over the fact that you have to forcefully take someone else's property and give it to someone who, at that point, they're probably freeloaders. Not everyone. Some people need welfare to get through a tough time. 100% sympathize with that. I would willingly help them out. But that's not everyone, and there's quite a few of them. So if you can get over that problem, then Bernie Sanders has my support. But I don't think you can. If you can,
he's not a radical socialist though, right? Like he doesn't want to, at least relative to actual radical socialists. Bernie Sanders is a fairly moderate socialist in terms that he doesn't want an actual revolution. He doesn't want to totally overthrow government and throw the entire force system out of capitalist extreme.
No, he doesn't want to do that. But
he did early on in his career, but he quickly moderated himself.
Okay. So if you make around $250,000 a year, which is living large, you have been very successful.
It depends on where you live, but yes. If you make 250,000 in California, that's, I mean, you're doing well, but you could be doing better. But if you make 250,000 in Texas or the South, I mean, yeah, you're doing well.
Exactly. But by and large, you're at the 1%.
With 250,000.
Yeah.
You're in the top tax bracket. I don't think you're the 1%.
Yeah, you are.
You think?
Yeah, top 1% is actually pretty low. It's like 160,000. That's how much you're making. You're getting taxed now about 55 to 60%
sure.
of what you make. That means people who are working and making that much money have to work about half of the year for free before they make any money. And then you see people who work, school teachers, people who work and earn, 40, 50,000, they're going to get taxed about 20% of their income. And then you have the lowest bracket. If you're making less than $20,000 a year, you don't pay any federal tax. So most people in America don't pay any federal tax. But the top 1% has to work for an entire year before they even see money that they're going to be able to use.
If you make what did you say?
I think 200, like 40,000?
If you make under 40,000, you pay zero?
No, it's under 20,000, I believe.
Well, if you get taxed 10% from 0 to 9,000 a year.
Okay, 10%.
Yeah. So it's not zero, but it's a lot less. So the top tax bracket for single households is 37% of your income goes to the federal government. If you make over $500,000 a year as a single member of the household, you'll be taxed 37%. And that's just income tax.
Yeah, that's just income tax.
That's huge. That's crazy.
You have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Then you have your state income tax. So Texas doesn't have a state income tax, but they have a property tax. So if you own a house that's like, own a house that's $1 million, you're going to be paying $10,000 a year on top of that. It's a lot, and it ends up coming to about 50-60% in taxes.
Yeah.
And this isn't to say that's not, you don't need to be taxed at a different rate. But what Bernie Sanders is pushing for is, I mean, the 1% is paying 70, 80%.
Yeah.
People are just going to leave the US.
Right.
When Bernie
Absolutely.
Sanders says make the 1% pay their fair share, and this is where Bernie gets run, floated down the river. Pay their fair share doesn't mean people who own a small business and make $300,000 a year. No, he's talking about people in venture capitalists and private equity. So what happens is when you work in venture capital and private equity, you make the majority of your income in stock option.
Yep.
So you might make $100,000 a year and then make $5 million in stock options. But when you liquidate those stock options, you only have to use a capital gains tax, which is 20%. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yep.
So they're paying what? 25% tax on their $100,000 cash, and then they're paying 20% on the other 5 million. When Bernie Sanders says make them pay their fair share, that's what he means. But then again, that's been conflated into, okay, well, we'll just tax everyone because no one's really going to understand capital gains tax.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
I think that's largely where he lost me as well, was taxation. Because I agree with you as well, is when you have that much money and you're the head of a corporation, or a lot of your money is made through stocks, you can just move. Like you have no reason to remain in a country that taxes you that heavily. So I think that's a huge hole in his plan. He doesn't really recognize that the people who have that much disposable income can just leave. They can just leave
yeah.
the nation and not pay your taxes. And that's a huge problem, because we do need taxes. I think taxes are really important. Obviously, I think they're a duty of the citizens.
Yeah.
But I think when you're
you
taxing,
gotta pay,
why tax that heavily? You know what I mean? I think state taxes should be implemented at a higher level than they are currently. You said Texas is at 0. I think South Carolina is at 10%.
Yeah. But that's state
I think
income.
that the federal government is overstepping in terms of taxation. I think that it should be much more local. I think that it should be, because, for example, in California, the quality of life at $200,000 is nowhere near the quality of life on the East Coast at $200,000.
And why is that? Because of the socialist policies of, okay, let's take more money and provide more services for the low income, who a large portion of them are freeloaders. Actually, I don't know if a large portion.
Yeah, I don't know.
There are freeloaders in California. There's no question about
there's
that.
freeloaders everywhere. But yeah, I think definitely population has a lot to do with it. Population density obviously has a lot to do with it. There's a lot of environmental policies in California that aren't really enforced anywhere else. That has a lot to do with it. There's a lot of taxes to pay in California. There's a lot of roads to upkeep. There's a lot of, the population density alone causes a lot of problems in terms of taxation.
Well, yeah, the more people you have, the more bad apples you're gonna get.
Sure.
And so my issue is Bernie Sanders, he can't explain that to the general population. I'm sorry. The general population is really stupid.
Oh yeah, no, it's actually crazy how it's actually insane. I think the average IQ in the United States is 90.
Yeah,
which is really low. That's pretty low.
And IQ is a terrible determination of intelligence.
Oh, it's terrible. But
the willingness to learn versus the willingness to be fed information is astonishing. And it's those two that go together that make the media so deadly, is because they can say whatever they want, and they know these stupid sons of bitches are just going to take it.
Yeah, they're not going to question anything. There's no critical conversations going on in echo chambers around the country, whether it be left or right. There's no critical conversation happening.
Yeah, and so what's going to happen is, take the second bill trying to be pushed for relief to keep unemployment benefits going until January. California, New York, they're looking to prop that up to pay off their debts. California, New York, and Illinois are in tremendous debt. Why? Because their policies aren't sustainable. But they want to use, the emergency, they want to use COVID funds to pay off that debt in hindsight. And what is that going to do? That's going to increase taxes in Texas, Florida, Georgia, all these states who have balanced budgets. You're gonna see the 1% say, fuck that, I'm not paying for California to continue their policies.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And,
I
and
mean, you've
that's
already seen, who was it? Elon Musk. He left California.
Yeah.
He moved to
Elon Musk
Texas.
isn't even conservative. Elon Musk isn't
Elon Musk
conservative.
is like a more extreme Andrew Yang, which I actually liked Andrew Yang in a lot of ways, but he's
Yeah,
he's
and
he's a more extreme version of Andrew Yang, which is
it,
which is basically, what is it? Baseline income.
but the point is that even even Elon Musk is like, knows that this is getting ridiculous. The policies aren't sustainable for his business,
Sure.
and so he wants to. And it makes me laugh because the left has crucified Elon Musk. I mean, because Tesla is the top tier. Tesla's green. Tesla's forward thinking. It is the liberal car, and it's a beautiful car. You know what I
I
mean?
love that truck. I love that Cybertruck.
And but all the liberals are getting pissed off, and they're floating granny down the river because Elon Musk is leaving California. He's a conservative, bury him. Which as a conservative, I like. The more they try to bury Elon Musk and how quickly they aim to do so, whenever the left betrays their own because of some nuanced idea, because they think of something or they disagree with them on one aspect and they float them down the river, that's great. Tip to the left: when someone disagrees with you on something small, it's good to just kind of shrug it off a little bit, because the more you push them away, you're pushing them to another side, and it's not the side you want them on. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, even Elon Musk is leaving, and that's what we're going to see. Taxes in New York, taxes in California, taxes in Chicago, they're all going to go up exorbitantly, and everyone's going to leave. They're going to come to Texas, they're going to come to the southern states, they're going to come to Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, because taxes are lower, their businesses can thrive, and those are going to be the states that are going to see the most growth.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a brain drain.
That's been something that's been happening for a decade or so now. I mean, people have been leaving California for Texas
And it
for
pisses me off.
a good long bit.
Someone in Texas put up a sign at the border on the highway coming from California to Texas, and it said, "Welcome to Texas. Don't bring the ideas that ruined your state here."
Oh, no.
I think California.
I mean, Houston has some problems too, man.
I'm in Houston. It's got plenty of problems.
So I mean, I think it's largely, I think we can definitely blame it on the population, not entirely on the ideas, but they're definitely at fault too. But I
Well,
think Houston is definitely Houston Houston has a lot of issues as well.
yeah, and that's because people who have those ideals tend to gravitate towards more urban populations.
Sure.
I mean, that's why. I mean, the only Democratic, more progressive counties in Texas are, Dallas, Houston, and Austin, because they're the three largest cities in Texas.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I mean, with progressivism comes collectivism. So conservatism is much more isolatory. So I think that's definitely a trend that's been around for a long time. Like,
who's the governor of Florida right now? Ron DeSantis. Oh my!
what
Last week he let the media have it.
what did he
It
do?
was it was stunning. He let his mind be heard, which is he had the fire in his eyes. He basically says, "All right, the media has been coming after me. Oh, Florida's the next New York. Florida's going to collapse. They're opening too early. The restrictions are too lax." And he basically says, "It's been 8 weeks since you guys have said that. Where is the collapse? Where is the death? Where is everything falling apart?" Because we see Florida's leading the nation in their response. So far, not pretty much no move they've made has been wrong. They've weathered the storm so far, and so him losing his mind to the media was pretty priceless.
Yeah, I didn't see that one. what has been the most effective handling of COVID by state in your estimation?
In my opinion, it's been Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Um, people understand that to a degree. Yes, there COVID is a threat for at risk populations, and we need to cater to that, and we need to understand that. But Americans are pretty self-conscious when it comes to their own safety. You say, hey, this is a thing. If you're in a crowded population, you should probably wear a mask. We're not going to force you to do that. Do things at your own will. I mean, they've let it fall back to the business owners. If I want to go into a Home Depot and I want to buy some sheet metal, I have to understand that going to Home Depot, there is a risk. I can evaluate that risk. The government's job is to say, these are the risks, these are the data, these are the stats. That is the media and government's job, right?
Yep. Yep.
It's my job to take that information and make a sound decision. Okay, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm not living with anyone who's in these at-risk categories. I'm okay to go and buy something from Home Depot. It's probably safe for me to go to Target and get something.
Sure.
It's probably safe for me to go to a park and enjoy a day in the sun. If I was living with an 80-year-old grandpa with heart disease and bronchitis, yeah, it's probably not good that I go and I risk bringing that back.
Sure.
Like, people can make these decisions, whether it's, they're conscious of it or not. People can make these decisions.
Absolutely.
It's not
But
the government's job to determine the risk assessment for individuals.
sure. And I think that's I think I like that as well, that it fell back on businesses. I don't like the idea of government saying, businesses, you have to enforce this.
Yeah.
So I think
And
I
also,
think businesses should be able to say, you can't come shop at our store unless you have a mask on. I think that's good. What
yeah,
they
and
can also do is, hey, we'll shop for you. We'll go inside and grab your items. You tell us what you want, we'll get them.
I went to Best Buy to pick up a power cable, and business are coming up with new ways. When you have competition and you have a desire, they're always going to have a better idea than what the government comes up with,
Right.
because they
Absolutely.
have something to lose. The government has nothing to lose, and that's why Whitmer has been crucified these last few weeks, because she's trying to strong arm business.
And I absolutely agree. I think she's been crucified rightly. I think
Rightfully
she's
so, like
absolutely
that.
justified.
Yeah, and so you see businesses coming up with better ideas. You see, drive through restaurants are thriving. I wouldn't say thriving, but they're making it. You have, nice steak dinners. My parents, a couple weeks ago, they went on a date, and they went to a nice steakhouse, and they brought them out their steak dinner, and then they went for a drive, and and that was their date night. Like, that's something that typically you wouldn't think of, but it's a lot better than the idea the government had, which was, oh, we'll just close it. What we're going to see is we're going to see all of these states that have laxed and have allowed, ultimately capitalism to determine the best course of action to balance safety, risk, and reward. We're going to see all of these states bounce back significantly faster, because the PPP only does so much. The SBA loans can only do so much, and they can only hold on for so long. Like, we're on borrowed time. We're gonna have to pay all this back,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
and so that's where we run the risk.
Yeah. And I think that's a risk that will definitely continue to rise the longer we have this pandemic kind of taking place.
The CDC, which has been, unhelpful at best. They just changed their website. They changed their website where it was a retraction. They're now saying that the only main way that you can get COVID is from interacting with individuals. When you're in a tight space, and the water molecules are floating around with COVID, I guess droplets.
Hmm.
When you're talking with people, when you're in close contact, it isn't really spread through surfaces. So that was something that everyone was losing their mind over. Oh, well, I mean, you walk home, and you got mom with the groceries washing the bread in the sink because we're all told that COVID is spread through surfaces. People said, oh, it's just a bad flu. Well, for people under 35 without any major health issues, it is just a bad flu. If you're under 25, it isn't even that. It's like 3 times less deadly than the flu. Now, once you get into the 50s, 60s, 70s, okay, then it's a little more serious.
I mean, it's basically just a weak immune system problem. If you're really young or really old or you have pre-existing health conditions, you're going to have a lot harder time.
Yeah, we have like of children under the age of like 15, we've got like 3 cases. Don't quote me on that, but it's in the single digits.
Well, I think it's important to exercise caution. So I think the pandemic is warranted in that way, but I think it's absolutely naive to believe that the government doesn't have other 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 intentions when going into something like this. There are absolutely other issues that are it's a combination of things that bring this response, right? It's not solely the pandemic.
Yeah, never let a good crisis go to waste. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. I tend to be one, so
You do tend to be one.
you know, I think there might be a little of that being dabbled around right now. You see states fighting over getting more money to clear their own debts. You see businesses who are gathering pretty substantial sums of money. I think, what was it? Planned Parenthood got an SBA loan. So the SBA loans. So there's 2 different loans. There's the PPP, the Payment Protection Program, and the SBA loans, the Small Business Association loans, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
PPP works if you're under 5. Both of these loans work if your company is under 500 employees. You're eligible for these. So what you do is, say I have 10 employees, each of them make $150,000 a year, and COVID hits, and I'm going to have to get rid of 5 of them. There's just no way I can pay all 5 of these people $150,000 and keep my business afloat. I apply for a PPP loan, and the government basically fronts up to $90,000, all 10 of their salaries, up to $90,000, with the condition that from point A to point B, I don't fire any of those 10. And if I fire one of them, then there's a penalty and I have to pay a certain amount of it back. And that's all, kind of an algorithm.
Sure.
But they give me that money and I keep them on staff. The SBA loans work similarly. They're low interest. They're like 1% forgivable loans, which means ultimately you don't really have to pay them back.
Yeah, they're basically grants.
Keep these people. Yeah, if you keep paying these people, you keep them employed, then you don't have to pay back the loan. Planned Parenthood got one. Like, Planned Parenthood is universally known to have more than 500 employees. Why are they getting $1.5 million from the PPP?
Wait, are they? Are they more than 500? Like, wait.
The National Planned Parenthood organization.
Well, I
Yes,
think
they have.
is the headquarters. Because are you talking about like every single one of their stations counts as an employee, or are you saying just their headquarters? And also their nonprofit. Doesn't that have something to do with it?
I'm not sure about nonprofit. So nonprofit primarily only applies. Nonprofits work as regular businesses with some tax exemptions.
Right. They have a tax deductibility. They're in a 501c3 taxability mode.
That really only applies for the taxes you pay as a nonprofit and the tax exemptions you can give to other people.
The SBA also gave them funding.
Yeah. So
but they took them back. The SBA are taking them back.
Yeah, they're taking them back because people were.
But the PPP stays. The PPP has stayed so far. But the main reason, the issue that this has become such a viral event is because the Trump administration has publicly called out for the Planned Parenthood to give back the PPP.
And here's the thing: Planned Parenthood isn't going to be the first person we're going to find out took loans.
Well, I mean, they're not the first now.
Yeah, trust me.
Yeah.
There's going to be 150 other companies conservative, liberal, left, right, whatever you want to call it, there's going to be a lot of other companies who took these loans who weren't supposed to take these loans, and it's going to be the next big scandal. Trust me.
Are you assigning like a political orientation to Planned Parenthood? Would you say, like, are they left? Are they right? Because I know you are pro-life. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I'm pro-life.
Okay.
I would say they lean towards the left. That's probably why they were called out. That's why they were called out. If it wasn't an abortion clinic, nobody would have cared. Like honestly, like nobody would have like been hunting it down. But that's why it was brought to light. As far as Planned Parenthood being assigned a side, yeah, it's probably more on the liberal side.
Well, yeah, I think we can definitely.
That shouldn't be a controversial comment.
No, I was just wondering because I mean, obviously there are political orientations to corporations, and especially nonprofits. I would say, as honestly, in the past 5 or 6 years, though these companies have become very much more political. I mean, based on who is advertising on Fox and who is advertising on CNN. I mean, that's basically what it's come down to.
I mean, everything's politicized, but
well, yeah, right. But it's become more expressly politicized. Yeah. I would say for sure.
And yeah, that my statement on that doesn't have anything to do with Planned Parenthood being to the left or right, or the morality or the justification of the rights or anything on Planned Parenthood. That's for another conversation.
Right. We can definitely talk about that in another podcast. But you were just explicitly saying
people are going to start taking advantage of this.
Sure, absolutely.
People have been taking advantage of this. And we're only going to hear more.
Yeah.
One day we're going to find out, Amazon got $10 million from the PPP. People are going to be up in arms. It's going to be the end of the world. We're like,
well, I mean, they're not paying a tax right now.
Yeah. I mean,
where is it? New York.
Yeah. I mean,
which I think is a good thing, but
Yeah. I think it's necessary for a time being. I mean, we have to keep these things afloat for now.
Yeah.
Till January, that's a little, that's a different story. But for the time being, yeah, these programs were really, and I got to give it to the federal government, brilliantly employed, wonderfully. They gave it to the banks. They said they left the duty on the banks to distribute them. The SBA is a small organization. The SBA doesn't have the power to disseminate this kind of cash to this many people. So they allocated it to the banks, and the banks have been doing it. And, you can't get like $3 trillion out the door. The door's only so big, so they gave it to the banks. And I think they've done a really good job. They've gotten a lot of money out of the door. And another point is when you give it to businesses, they have something to lose. They're going to have a better idea than some guy who has, they have no incentive to do something right.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Benalytical Podcast. We'll see you next time.